Tonight, we're heading to a stretch of farmland just outside Shedden, Ontario, where 8 men were found shot to death inside 4 vehicles on a quiet April morning. It looked like a gang hit, but the truth ran deeper. These weren't enemies. They were brothers. Members of the same outlaw biker club who turned on each other in one of the most violent betrayals in Canadian crime history. This is episode 19, the Shedden Biker Massacre. It was Saturday, April 8th, 2006, and the sun had barely cleared the horizon over Elgin County, Ontario. The land around Shedden is flat and open, rows of cornfields, low barns, the kind of place where everyone waves when they pass on the road. Nothing ever happens there, until that morning. The first 911 call came from a farmer who thought he'd come across an accident. 4 vehicles, 2 SUVs, a sedan, and a tow truck, sat abandoned near a rural laneway off Stafford Line, doors closed, engines off. When he stepped closer, he saw shattered glass, blood spatter, and what looked like bullet holes in the windows. By the time the OPP arrived, the truth was impossible to miss. Inside those cars were 8 bodies, each shot multiple times, some slumped forward in the driver's seat, others stuffed awkwardly in the back. One man's hand still gripped a beer can. Another's phone lay on the seat beside him, its screen cracked but glowing faintly with missed calls. Detectives started referring to the site as Ground Zero. It was the largest mass murder Ontario had ever seen. From above, the scene looked eerily calm. The vehicles were lined up almost neatly, like someone had parked them in formation. But the stillness was deceptive. These men hadn't died here. They'd been brought here, dumped. That detail would change everything. As forensics teams worked through the day, the scope of it grew. Each victim carried biker insignia, jackets, patches, rings, bearing the red and gold colors of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. One officer, new to major crimes, asked a senior detective what the colors meant. The detective just shook his head and said, "Trouble." The Bandidos were one of the world's biggest outlaw biker gangs, second only to the Hells Angels. And suddenly, their members were turning up dead in the middle of Ontario farm country. Police knew this couldn't be random. 8 men executed at close range suggested planning, discipline, possibly military precision. They began canvassing nearby farms, knocking on doors, pulling cell records, and trying to piece together who these men were and what they were doing out here. When autopsies began, a clearer picture emerged. Most of the victims had been shot in the head or chest. Some were bound. Several were found without shoes, a sign investigators believed that they had been forced to kneel. One by one, the bodies were identified. Luis Raposo, Jamie Flans, George Crearakis, Frank Salerno, Michael Trotta, Paul Sinopoli, John Mushidere, and Marcello Aravena. All of them, friends, brothers, patch holders in the same club. The news spread fast. Headlines called it the Shedden Biker Massacre. Satellite trucks rolled into town. Reporters interviewed locals who said the same thing over and over. We never thought something like this could happen here. But as investigators soon learned, the seeds of this massacre had been growing for months, planted in paranoia, power struggles, and one man's obsession with control. To understand what happened in that field near Shedden, you have to go back to the story of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club in Canada and how a brotherhood built on loyalty and rebellion slowly devoured itself. The Bandidos started in Texas in the mid-1960s. Their slogan was simple: "We are the people our parents warned us about." They wore red and gold patches stitched with a cartoon Mexican bandit holding a machete and a pistol, a symbol meant to mock fear and authority alike. In the US, they were rivals to the Hells Angels. The fights between those clubs, bombings, shootouts, highway ambushes, left a trail of blood across the states. But in Canada, the Bandidos were never more than a shadow of that power. By the early 2000s, the Canadian Bandidos were fragmented. A national chapter had been established in Winnipeg, led by Giovanni Muscedere, known to everyone as Boxer. He was old school, a man who believed in the original outlaw code: loyalty, brotherhood, no snitches. Muscedere's second-in-command was Frank Salerno, a loyal friend and protector. Together, they built a small Ontario branch known as the No Surrender Crew. But reality was less glamorous than the mythology. Most of their members held day jobs, worked out of garages, and had more rust than chrome on their bikes. The so-called Canadian arm of the Bandidos was small, broke, and often drunk. Meanwhile, south of the border, the American leadership in Texas saw them as an embarrassment. There were warnings: get your house in order, stop fighting internally, or lose your patches. And that's when the paranoia started to spread. In southern Ontario, the No Surrender crew gathered in a farmhouse owned by a man named Wayne Kellestein. He was in his mid-50s, wiry, tattooed, volatile. A veteran biker with a long criminal record. Weapons charges, assaults, connections to the London Outlaws, and Satan's Choice before jumping ship to the Bandidos. He was obsessed with biker hierarchy, the titles, patches, and rituals. But his own life was crumbling. He was behind on bills, drinking heavily, and spiraling deeper into paranoia. To Kellestein, the idea of being stripped of his Bandidos colors wasn't just humiliation, it was annihilation. He ranted to friends that the Winnipeg leadership was plotting against him, that they wanted to de-patch him and seize control of the Ontario chapter. In Kellestein's world, that was a death sentence. At his farm in Iona Station, Kellestein began gathering weapons, rifles, pistols, boxes of ammunition. He cleaned his barn, set up chairs, prepared for what he said would be a church meeting, biker slang for an official chapter gathering. Those around him noticed the shift. One biker later told investigators, Wayne started talking like a preacher before a war. He told his crew to be ready for anything. In truth, he'd already decided what anything meant. Meanwhile, up in Winnipeg, boxer Musadere and his men were driving east to Ontario. They'd been summoned by Kellestein for a face-to-face meeting to clear the air, to discuss the rumors, the politics, the constant friction. They believed it would be a talk among brothers. They didn't know that one of their own had already switched sides. Michael Sandom, a former Winnipeg police officer turned biker, had drifted between the two factions. Ambitious and untrustworthy, Sandom wanted power and saw Kellestein as his path to it. He told Kellestein that Boxer's men were planning to remove him from the club. At the same time, he told Boxer that Kellestein was acting crazy. He was playing both sides, feeding paranoia until it boiled over. By early April, every man in that crew was armed, exhausted, and convinced the others were out to kill him first. They called it a church meeting. What it became was a trap. The night of April 7th, 2006, the Bandidos gathered at Kellestein's farm under the guise of peace. But for at least one of them, peace was never part of the plan, and by sunrise, 8 men would be dead. It is April 7th, 2006, and Kellestein's farm sits off a narrow back road outside Iona Station, a sagging white farmhouse, rusted silos, and a leaning barn that smells of oil, hay, and spilled beer. Inside, fluorescent lights flicker. A Bandidos flag hangs over a plywood bar. On a workbench, boxes of ammunition, a sawed-off shotgun, and a stack of cold Molson cans. It's a Friday night, and the club is meeting to talk things out. Just before 10 p.m., 3 vehicles pull into the yard. Out step John Musadere, Frank Salerno, and 6 other members of the Ontario and Winnipeg chapters. They're tired from the drive, but relieved to be here, finally ready to settle months of infighting. Kellestein meets them at the door. He's grinning, but his eyes look wired. He's been drinking. A .45 pistol rests on his hip. Church meeting, he tells them. Everyone inside. They file into the barn, where Michael Sandom waits with 2 younger members loyal to Kellestein. No one knows that Sandom has already loaded his gun. The meeting starts like any other. Talk about money, about Winnipeg leadership, about the future of the club, but beneath the surface, everything is ready to snap. Kellestein paces, ranting about betrayal, about respect. He accuses Raposo of stealing money. Raposo fires back, calls him a drunk and a liar. Then a shot rings out. Luis Raposo drops instantly. Blood sprays the wall behind him. For a moment, no one moves. Then chaos. Some men reach for their guns, others freeze. Sandom fires again. Someone screams. Kellestein orders everyone to the ground. His voice cuts through the noise. On your knees. Now. The biker code, the myth of brotherhood, disintegrates in seconds. Over the next hour, the farm turns into a slaughterhouse. Each man is dragged out one by one, forced to kneel in the dirt or against a barn wall. They're shot in the head or chest at point-blank range. Kellerstein taunts them before each execution. He makes them say their club oath. He makes them look him in the eye. One of the survivors later told police, "He was enjoying it. He kept saying, 'This is justice. This is how brothers pay.'" Outside, a cold rain started to fall. By 3 a.m., 8 men are dead. The barn floor is slick with blood. Kellerstein and Sandom stand over the bodies, arguing about what to do next. They decide to move the corpses before daylight. Over the next 2 hours, they stuff the bodies into the victims' own vehicles, cramming 2 and 3 at a time into SUVs and trunks. Kellerstein insists on positioning them neatly. "Line them up like soldiers," he says. At dawn, a convoy of cars rolls north toward Shedden. They turn onto a farm lane, abandon the vehicles, and wipe them for prints. Kellerstein throws his blood-soaked clothes into a ditch, then heads home for breakfast. He tells one accomplice, "It's done. We're clean. He was wrong." By sunrise, those same cars sit quiet in that field outside Shedden, the windows fogged from the night chill, the bodies already stiff. Within hours, a farmer will spot them, and the largest murder investigation in Ontario history will begin. By sunrise, Stafford Line looked like something out of a nightmare. Police cruisers blocked the road in both directions. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind. 8 men, 8 bandidos, lay dead in 4 vehicles scattered across the field. Detectives from the Ontario Provincial Police Major Crime Unit moved in, led by Detective Inspector Bill Renton. He would later describe it as organized chaos, a crime scene spread over an acre of farmland, with more evidence than any single team could process. Every vehicle became its own puzzle. Windows shot out, shell casings under the seats, blood smears wiped with something that smelled faintly of bleach. The first challenge was to figure out who these men were, but many of them didn't have identification on them, so their tattoos, biker cuts, and jewelry became the key. Within a day, they were confirmed as members of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, men who, until a few hours earlier, called themselves brothers. Reporters descended on Shedden like vultures. Headlines screamed, "Biker Massacre in Ontario Farmland," and "Bloodbath among Bandidos." Every network wanted to know, was this a gang war? Were the Hells Angels involved? But behind the scenes, investigators suspected something even darker, that this wasn't a battle between rivals. It was an internal purge. Within 48 hours, the focus shifted south toward a man named Wayne Kellerstein. His name came up again and again from informants and old police files. Everyone in Ontario's biker world knew him. A violent, unhinged man with a farm, a history, and a temper that could split concrete. When OPP units arrived at his property, they found the barn locked tight. Inside, spent shell casings, a bullet hole in the wall, beer bottles, and a Bandidos flag stained with blood. Investigators also found a Nazi flag hanging beside it, a chilling echo of Kellerstein's obsession with control and supremacy. The barn told its own story, and every inch of it screamed murder. Forensic specialists began cataloging everything: blood patterns, footprints, and cell phone data. The breakthrough came from the victims' phones, call logs showing late-night conversations with Kellerstein and Michael Sandham, the ex-cop turned biker. GPS data placed both men near Shedden at dawn, the exact window when the bodies were dumped. Then came a tip, someone who had heard Kellerstein bragging in the days after the massacre. He'd been drinking in a local bar, telling anyone who'd listen that the problem had been solved. That was enough. On April 16, 2006, 8 days after the discovery, OPP tactical teams surrounded Kellerstein's farmhouse. He surrendered without a fight. Inside, officers found loaded guns, shell casings, and blood traces matching multiple victims. They also found notebooks filled with rants about loyalty and betrayal, and pages that read more like manifestos than club minutes. In the months that followed, the investigation grew into a legal marathon. The OPP formed a task force called Project Tandem, one of the most expensive criminal investigations in Ontario history. Dozens of witnesses were interviewed, hundreds of exhibits cataloged. When the trial finally began in 2009, it was held under tight security in London, Ontario. The courtroom looked more like a fortress with armed guards, bulletproof glass, metal detectors at every door. At the defense table sat Wayne Kellestein, Michael Sandham, and 4 other men. The charges, 8 counts of first-degree murder. The Crown laid out its case. Kellestein and Sandham had orchestrated a calculated internal execution to seize control of the club. Witnesses described Kellestein's Nazi paraphernalia, his obsession with rank, his delusions of grandeur. They played audio from his interrogation, where he alternated between denial and boasting. Forensic experts testified about matching bullets, DNA, and cell data. One forensic officer said it was like a jigsaw puzzle made of violence. Every piece fit perfectly. After months of testimony, the jury returned their verdict. All 6 accused were found guilty of first-degree murder. Each received life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. In his sentencing remarks, Justice Thomas Heaney called the massacre a slaughter of your own brothers, an act of barbarity and betrayal beyond comprehension. When the verdict was read, Kellestein laughed. He looked at the families in the gallery and muttered, "No surrender." For the victims' families, it was a bitter kind of closure. They'd lost sons, fathers, and brothers not to rivals or enemies, but to the people who once swore to protect them. The Shedden investigation consumed years, millions of dollars, and countless hours of police work. But when it was over, the Canadian chapter of the Bandidos was finished. Its name burned out in a blaze of ego and paranoia. 8 men dead, 6 in prison, and 1 farmhouse that would never lose its ghosts. Today, if you drive that same road outside Shedden, you'd never know what happened there. The field is just another stretch of southern Ontario farmland. Flat, ordinary, forgettable. The grass grew back. The soil swallowed the blood. But for those who worked the case, and for the families left behind, the ghost never really left. The OPP called it a massacre born of ego. 8 men dead because pride, paranoia, and power meant more than friendship. In the years since, detectives have said what shocked them most wasn't the violence. It was how easily it came, how quickly brotherhood turned to fear. The Bandidos name still exists around the world, Texas, Europe, Australia, but in Canada, it's a ghost of itself. The Shedden killings wiped out an entire chapter overnight and destroyed any chance of rebuilding. One investigator put it bluntly, Shedden ended the Bandidos in Canada. They killed their own brand. For many Canadians, that's where the story ends. A bloody cautionary tale about bikers and bad choices. But for the families, it's never been that simple. Some still visit the graves each spring. Others can't bring themselves to drive that road. A few have said they forgive. Most just want to forget. What's left is the lesson that loyalty without honesty becomes control. That fear disguised as respect can rot a group from the inside. And that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who destroy you. When the trial ended, a journalist asked one of the investigators what he remembered most from those long months in the field. He said it wasn't the bodies, or the evidence, or even the barn. It was the silence afterward, the way the countryside seemed to swallow everything whole, as if it had been waiting all along. He said, "It's peaceful there now, but it's not innocent." 8 men died for a patch, 6 went to prison for pride, and an entire community learned how fragile the idea of brotherhood can be when built on fear. Welcome back to Northern Dark, True Canadian Crime, and I'm Mark.
Welcome back to our podcast, and I'm Leah.
It's been almost 20 years, and I still think about what one Ontario provincial police investigator said after the verdicts. He called Shedden a massacre born of ego. 8 men gone because no one could back down.
Yeah, I read that quote. He said the part that haunted him wasn't the violence, but how ordinary it all felt, that they were just regular guys playing gangster until it turned real.
Right. And another officer, one who processed the barn, said, "I've worked scenes with more blood, but never more betrayal." That line stuck with me.
Because that's what this case really is, betrayal layered over fear. These men didn't just lose trust in each other, they lost the ability to tell truth from paranoia.
And once that happened, the rituals, the patches, the oaths meant nothing. They were acting out a fantasy of power. The investigator who led Project Tandem said something like, They wanted to be outlaws, but they didn't understand discipline.
It's strange to hear cops talk almost like sociologists, but it makes sense. You can't spend years inside a case like that and not start asking why.
Exactly. The police saw it up close. The hierarchy, the ego, the need to belong. One detective told the press they called it brotherhood, but it was really fear with a leather jacket.
That's brutal and true. I think about how small that world became for them. Once Kellenstein convinced himself he was being depatched, everyone else became an enemy.
He built a universe where loyalty only went one way toward him. When that happens, you can justify anything.
And the others followed because walking away meant losing identity, maybe even your life. It's that mix of belonging and coercion that fascinates me.
It's the same pattern you see in cults, gangs, sometimes even corporations. The symbols change, but the psychology doesn't.
The judge captured it perfectly. He called the killings a slaughter of your own brothers, an act of barbarity and betrayal beyond comprehension. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing something hollow at the core of human pride.
And it cost everyone. The families still talk about the silence afterward, the way no one wanted to say the word bandidos out loud anymore. One officer told a reporter, "It's peaceful there now, but it's not innocent."
That line gives me chills. Because it's true, the land forgets, but people don't.
For me, the Shedden case is a reminder that violence doesn't just destroy lives, it erases meaning. These men killed for a patch that no longer exists.
And maybe that's the saddest part. Everything they fought for disappeared the moment they pulled the trigger.
Exactly. The brotherhood they claimed to defend died before the first shot was fired.
It's a dark story, but it says something important. Loyalty without empathy always ends in ruin.
Yeah. And when respect is measured by fear, you're already lost. Is there anything we need to say before we sign off?
Yes, before we go, I want to thank everyone for listening and watching our podcast episodes and shorts. We just passed 50,000 views and 260 followers on YouTube. It means the world to see Northern Dark growing the way it has. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and share the show. It really helps us keep telling these stories.
Absolutely. And as always, see you next Monday. Until then, take care of each other.